This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
You're listening to Beyond Boss Fights, gaming conversations with interesting people. And now, here's your host, Braxwolf.
Hey everybody, welcome to Beyond Boss Fights. We're doing something a little bit different today, and think of this as kind of an experiment, or as I was just explaining to my guests, this is going to be kind of a side quest to the Beyond Boss Fights main quest line. I'm not going to put a number on it. I'm not going to do anything fancy to it. But I would like to welcome my guest, Roger Edwards from the Burton and Scrooge podcast and Contains Moderate Peril. Welcome, Roger. Thanks for being on.
Hello there. Hi, Brex. Thanks for having us back on the show.
It's always fun, Roger. And I know people who listen to my show probably listen to Roger's show. In fact, I know there's a couple that have come to mind after I have guested on Contains Moderate Peril and commented on your blogs and things like that. So we probably have a lot of crossover in our audience. What we're going to do today is we're just going to throw some things out there, because Roger and I have been kind of traveling through somewhat similar, how do you want to say, kind of paths the last maybe 6 months or so as far as content creation, Roger. Is that accurate, you think?
I think, yeah. I think there's some common experiences there, and hopefully as we discuss them, I think maybe a lot of the listeners will probably pick up on things that they think, yeah, I recognize that. I've gone through that myself.
Yeah, I agree. And if people have been listening, they're aware that I've scaled back a lot of my stuff here lately, content creation wise. I haven't been blogging nearly as much. I had to drop out of the Extra Life marathon from a streaming standpoint and from a fundraising standpoint. Beyond Boss Fights has kind of slipped a little bit, although it's certainly long from dead. But as I've been trying to weigh, what needs to stay and what needs to go and what needs to scale back, I look around and I see people that have abandoned their blogs, and I see people who have pod faded. And I know that, Roger, you've several times gone through iterations where you've either combined or shut down a blog site or quit your podcast before you came back with a different one. I wondered if you had any insight as to when is the right time to move on from what you're doing, something that you once enjoyed and was very heavily invested in?
I think the short answer is when your instincts tell you it's time to stop dead. However, I think for a lot of content creators, as soon as that races through their brain, they then fight against it. I think so many people start writing a blog, start creating a podcast or YouTube videos, and the complexities, the actual technical complexities, they quickly master, and they go, hey, this is not so bad. And because they're starting out and they're enthusiastic about it, the initial couple of weeks, couple of months, the material comes together. They're happy with the results. They're happy with their audience. It doesn't cross their mind that it's a job. After you've continued along this road for a while, you start becoming aware of the fact that you need to be original, not to repeat yourself. You want to come up with new and innovative ways to engage with your audience. You don't necessarily just want to look at the news stories this week and say, okay, we're going to discuss those, knowing fully well that everyone else that within the community is going to be doing exactly the same. So I think a lot of content creators at some point suddenly realize that it's not just the mechanics, it's the required level of creativity that they impose upon themselves that is possibly the hardest aspect to maintain. And that's when they start to feel the burn. And you got to be careful at that point, because you suddenly find that the love and the passion starts changing and it starts becoming sort of obligation, giri, as sort of the Japanese word, and then it can just decline into hatred, annoyance, and then you can, if you don't deal with that by either stopping your content creation or taking a break or taking it in a different direction, it will bleed through. It will bleed through into your show, and your listeners will pick up on it, and that's not a good situation. That's not a good situation.
Yeah, you hit on a couple of things that really would ring true for me. I don't dislike doing the podcast at all, really, but there are certain aspects of it that I dislike. Scheduling guests had become something that's very difficult to do, especially if you continue. I like to have, like a kind of a broad range of guests if I can on Beyond Boss Fights. And so that means kind of reaching outside of your time zone, across cultural lines and things like that. And that makes it very, very difficult to schedule a good time for somebody to come in and do your show, especially if you're trying to be sensitive to their time and you're also trying to schedule around your full life. Makes it kind of it's almost the most difficult part of doing the show, really, besides maybe editing, which is just work,
You've touched upon the two factors that really did have a major impact upon the fact that the Contains Moderate Peril podcast folded eventually. We ended up with a situation where we had 5 hosts spread around the world. And this is not in any way a criticism of any of those, but just everyone has things that they need to do in their life, and getting people together in one place, making sure that they've warmed up, that they're enthusiastic, that they feel that they've got an adequate contribution to that week's show and that someone else isn't squeezing them out. There's a lot of, dare I say it, man management issues. And that's tough. That is really, it's tough in the real world when you have it in work. And you suddenly realize that you've now got it in your hobby stroke pastime. And then editing. I think you can become a martyr to your own standards. And I know that you have high standards, that you like to present your show in a particular way. You like it to flow. You like it to have structure. You want it to have good audio quality. And I to a degree, have that as well. And Contains Moderate Peril, I always broadly modelled on sort of those news discussion shows where you had a panel of guests and someone would sort of moot the question and then different people would come in. So they were very labour intensive as far as the editing, although I'm sure some people wouldn't realise that. But an hour-long show, it would effectively take from 9 in the morning to about 6 in the evening to sort out, sometimes longer.
Right. How much internal pressure did you put on yourself to continue doing the podcast, let's say, after you knew it was time to quit? I mean, was there this feeling that there's going to be all these listeners out there that I'm letting down, or did you just kind of think, you know what, this is my thing, I've just got to move on?
I initially went through a Jekyll and Hyde situation where I wanted to just down tools and finish. And then I did concern myself about listeners. I also concerned myself about co-hosts and contributors. I felt there was an obligation to them, and I thought that going from weekly to monthly would be a way to resolve those. I thought that it would take the pressure off, allow us to have a lot of time to plan, plenty of time to organise. I thought that changing that format would resolve all those issues, and that was a mistake. And I regret it insofar as I brought on board some additional co-hosts, and they were looking forward to participating and being on a regular platform. And then within a couple of episodes of it going from weekly to monthly, I then shut it down a second time, and I thought that was very unfair to them. And I have subsequently apologised to both Pam and Hannah, because I thought that they didn't really need that. That I should have got my ducks in a row beforehand, and I shouldn't really have sort of messed them around like that. But as far as I know, that they're not holding any grudges against me. But again, I think this just highlights the fact that it's human nature to fight against the voice that tells you down tools and walk away now. But I think sometimes that is the best thing to do. And listeners are usually quite understanding. you've got a few crazy ones out there. But I think by and large, your core audience that leave you feedback and show your support, they understand.
Did you find that you heard from a lot more listeners once you had announced that you were closing down, or are your listeners pretty engaged in all cases anyway?
Yes and no. I mean, I think with all shows, there's sort of a group of people that always make themselves heard. They leave you feedback. They engage with you in Twitter. They show up when in the chat room, things like that. And when we announced that Contains Moderate Peril was going to be shut down, people did express sadness and appreciation. But then you do also get a lot of people who have never commented or said anything to you over the 2-3 year time span that you've been doing it. And it's like, oh, I really loved your show. Shame you're going. And you go, well, thanks, but I really wish you had just said something. It's really nice sometimes to get that feedback. I mean, when Brian shut down Mordor or Bust, some of the feedback he got was really quite moving. People were really sad to see him go. And he just said, this is great, but it's also a pain in the butt. Why didn't they just show a bit of support earlier in the proceedings? Mm-hmm. And it can help boost your levels of confidence and morale and keep the show going sometimes.
Yeah, I'll fully admit to kind of having, I don't know how to say this. I say one thing and sometimes I go back and I don't mean what I say. As far as statistics go, I continue to tell myself that I really don't care about numbers at all. I'm writing for myself, I'm podcasting for myself, yada, yada, yada. Then why do I keep checking the numbers every week? Why do I keep going back to those statistics? Something about the data is just fascinating to me. And it's a little bit, that makes it a little bit difficult to, I've kind of stopped blogging, not really completely stopped, but I'm not blogging with the same veracity as I was before. And yeah, I still have people hitting the back catalog, but it's certainly not where it was. When you don't put out fresh content, people stop coming to your page. And you notice that after a while, especially, I don't want to think that I was getting validation from that, but it was certainly something that, that I kept track of.
Stats and numbers are a difficult thing. I won't lie to you. I think everyone, when they start growing their site and they suddenly become aware that they've got some semblance of an audience, numbers does play a part in your thinking. Writing, podcasting, live streaming is it's an overt thing to do. It's not an introverted thing to do. And I think, you want feedback for technical reasons. Everyone likes to get positive feedback and have their ego stroked. And you can't not look at your numbers. And numbers can be very compelling, particularly when your site is growing. As when I moved from containsmoderateperil.com to .net, I should have made that transition seamless. And I kept the two sites running in parallel, and that had a very big impact on numbers. I kept looking at the stats for the old site, and the numbers had gone down by 60%. Because you weren't producing new content. Well, there was new content, but it was on the new site. But not everyone had figured out that there was a new site. But it was also, conversely, fascinating to see that for 2 months, nothing was going on that site. And yet a third of your traffic was still there, just going through your back catalogue. It's sort of strange, but the public, your audience, they come to your site for a reason. They're looking for interesting things to read or watch or listen to. And yeah, sure, they understand that you can't do it every day. But if you get into a pattern, they expect you to abide by that pattern. And the moment you don't, they just go and find something else to fill that gap, that 10, 20-minute gap, whatever it is that they're looking for to read something interesting and stuff. So some people would sometimes say the audiences are being fickle, and it's like, well, no, because I'm equally guilty myself. I'll go and read things. Yeah. And it's like, if there's nothing on Joe Blogg's site, and yet for the last 3 weeks there always was, and then it's not there, that's if I'll off to someone else's.
Exactly.
So, it's a curious relationship we have, though.
Yes. Of course, one of the reasons that we might decide it's time to move on from whatever it is we're doing, or at least scale back considerably, happens to do with the stage of life that you're in. And it's funny, I remember when I started getting into content production for Lotro players, it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. My kids were 2-3 years younger than they are now. And I thought I was pretty busy. And the fact that I was keeping up with the content production and the family and the job, I felt pretty good about all that. 2-3 years later, the kids are only a couple years older, but we're in a completely different situation now. My son's in high school. My other son is in junior high. My little two are in a different elementary school than the other two kids. So we're in 3 different schools. They're in all kinds of different sports. None of them can drive. And it's even busier now. Dare I say it's even busier now than when they were all little kids running around the house and trashing things. It's a different kind of busy for sure, but it takes up more of my time because there are no large blocks where I can do anything anymore, right? So I can't sit down and edit a podcast in one night. It's got to be over a period of time. Usually it takes about a week or maybe a week and a half to get through editing an hour-long podcast for me, just because I have to take smaller chunks of time to do it. And so I'm in a different stage of life now, and that has changed not only the way that I produce content, but it changes the way that I've gamed. Have you seen a similar thing in your life as you move through different stages?
Very much so. Very much so. I've always gamed. When I was in my late teens, I had a job. I had a job and an income and could then buy consoles as they came out, and therefore I could buy a lot of games. And because I was a guy living at home at that time, late teens with a job, living with my parents, but financially independent, and I could quite happily lose myself in that hobby and pastime and had a lot of fun. Then as you progress through life and you go out and you start dating, start moving from casual jobs to full-time career jobs and meet that special someone, fall in love, get married, all of a sudden those sort of hobbies and pastimes get relegated. And you do less of them because there are other commitments. And when my son was born, obviously division of chores, work, etc., gaming gets pushed out. But then as he started getting older, gaming started coming back. And it's like, hey, I can now game with my son. Grab some cheeky time that way. But it's a balancing act all the time, isn't it, between the things that you like to do, which you find pleasurable, and the fact that you've got a job, that there are chores to be done. You have a significant other who expects things from your time as well. And I've always maintained that balance. But then in 2007, I got divorced. And it was an interesting time gaming-wise, because social gaming was beginning to really grow. MMOs that have been around for a decade were beginning to now become something a lot more. And there was me with suddenly a lot of time on my hands, and I had a requirement to be social, because when you have a marriage breakdown, it doesn't just affect you, it affects things like friends. There are certain people who find the whole situation awkward and they don't want to take sides. So all of a sudden you suddenly start, not only have you lost your partner, you also find that your social network can take a bit of a pounding as well. And MMOs at the time filled that gap perfectly. I was still able to work, but I'd come home in the evening and you've got time to fill and wanted to fill, because you could then be sociable, and it sort of made a difficult situation easier. And plus, MMOs are a great way of networking and talking to people, sharing experiences, etc. So as I look through the various stages of my life, you can see the areas when the gaming pastime expanded and then contracted and then expanded and then contracted because of the situation that you're in at the time. Also at this time, around about 2007 onwards, that's when I started blogging quite heavily. And podcasting then followed with that, because I had the time and the resources to do it. In recent years, my relationship with my ex-wife has drastically improved. We shall refer to her henceforth as Mrs. Peril. I don't want to talk hugely in depth about my personal life, but we are sort of rebuilding bridges, as it were, and there is potentially a future between us. There's additional reasons for that because I've recently become a grandfather, and there's all sorts of reasons to have a united front when dealing with twin granddaughters.
Yeah.
And now, as a result of this situation, and the fact that I'm expanding my business, I'm a self-employed man. I have a small, modest IT consultancy. I'm looking to sort of hit specific goals now with my life. I want to sort of retire as soon as I can. I want to get some money behind me. I am looking at potentially moving. Me and Mrs. Peril have now got grandchildren to think of, and we've got all sorts of ideas and plans about what we can do to help our son. So as a result now, the gaming is waning again, as is potentially the blogging and the podcasting. And I know that's a long rambling diatribe, but I think it just succinctly illustrates real life causes your gaming and creative urges to sort of wax and wane, and it's all perfectly natural and just in the order of things, because life is not static unless you choose it to be so. And if you choose to make your life 100% static, well, then you can game and podcast and blog indefinitely. But I would say that you're doing so at the expense of other facets of your life.
No, you guys have talked on your show, and I fully buy into this, by the way, the concept of discovering an MMO at the exact perfect time. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. For some folks, it's because they were in college at the time and had a lot of free time, or because they were, right out of school and starting a job in a new area and didn't know anybody, or whatever it was. For me, I discovered MMOs not that long ago, 2011, 2012, something like that. But it was at a period of time where I had just decided, I'd made a specific decision in my career to not pursue something that I had been for a long time. And so I wouldn't want to say that I was completely lost, but there was certainly a lack of career goals due to me not knowing what I was going to do next. And MMOs were a perfect way to have some kind of a goal, right? I mean, there's all kinds of goals that you can set for yourself in an MMO, whether it be leveling or whatever other kind of progression is available. It was something that kind of fulfilled that need of continuing to progress when I felt like I was stuck in my work life, Fast forward to now, and I've kind of put some things together. I have more of a vision of what I want to do in the future, but it's going to take a lot more work to get there than if I was to just continue on the career path that I was on before. Because it's a switching gears type of thing. I'm going to have to start from square one, which means there's a lot of time that has to be put into it. And this is part of what has gone into some of the things that I've had to let go of in the last couple of months, because I keep thinking, what other things could I be doing in that time that I'm whatever, blogging, gaming, podcasting, where I could actually be progressing and helping out over not only myself in my career, but those that depend upon me. So again, it's an evolution of time. It's an evolution of where you are compared to where you were. It's a life in time is a moving and living organism, right? Kind of like communities. They're not static. The community that I interact with today from a gaming perspective is completely different than the one that I started with in 2011. Some of the people are the same, but a lot of them are completely different. Some have dropped off, some have come on. It's just amazing how everything kind of continues to move on, and you have fond memories of those times. But there is a point where you kind of have to look at it and go, okay, I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Which direction am I going to continue to do what I've been doing, or am I going to shift directions and do something different?
Oh yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. if the content creation is a stepping stone into a career of itself, then possibly it needs to be treated slightly differently. But I think for so many people that both you and I know, the content creation is just an additional part of their life on top of all the regular things. And I think everyone has this sort of difficult road to travel, and I think we all do it at different paces, and we all arrive at the finishing line at different times, and that is you just can't do everything that you want to do. And if you try to, you'll drive yourself crazy, and you'll end up doing lots of things but doing them very, very poorly, often at the expense of something else, or more importantly, someone else. And sooner or later, the penny drops, the shoe drops, however you want to use the phrase, where you just have to say, I can do this, I can do this, I can't do that. And you make decisions, tough decisions.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about the content creation possibly being part of your career. I had an interesting moment a couple of months ago where my second son, people know him as Broadkill, his gamer tag, came to me and he said, Dad, I want to be a YouTuber. And he didn't mean I just want to start a YouTube channel. He meant I want to do this as a career, you know? And that put me in a really interesting spot because as a gamer, I'm supposed to look at him and say, yeah, man, go try, do it, do whatever you can. You're going to be great. You know, it's going to work out for you. Anybody can do it. But as a father, I know the odds there, right?
Yes. Yes, indeed.
I know how difficult it is to make any money doing, having a job, a career doing YouTube, let alone making an actual career out of it where you don't have to do anything else. And so I kind of tweeted about it in jest. You know, I had this moment where my son and a few people were actually kind of, they were surprised that I wasn't discouraging. And I wasn't really discouraging him. I said, go ahead and try it out. But I also wanted to kind of manage the expectations a little bit, right? As a dad, I said, but you know what? It's really tough to do. And you're a really smart kid that can do just about anything else you wanted to. So keep that in mind. And I had a few people react in a way that was, you know, why were you discouraging to him, you know? But I'm in the back of my mind, I wonder if maybe they're not parents. Because I do want to be encouraging, but at the same time, let's not close any doors at this point, you know?
Exactly. It's nice to take the noble point of view that you can do anything you want, but being a successful YouTuber is not specifically purely based on your talent for creating content. There's other factors that come to play. Some of them are quite hard to quantify, and I think with so many media-based jobs, there's still an element of who you know, what you know, right place, right time. So many factors that you can't plan for, and it just makes the odds bigger and bigger. Contains Moderate Peril has at times over its lifespan become quite big, relatively. Quite big numbers to the website, quite big numbers to the old podcast. It's never put a penny in my pocket. In fact, if you look at it from a purely financial point of view, it's a bit of a money pit over times, but it's an indulgence, and it's not. I'm not spending money at the expense of other things. But no, you are in a very, very difficult situation there because it's not a pure A to B to C journey to be a successful YouTuber. There's wild cards in the equation. And it is, I'd actually argue that it's more of a job than other jobs. I think you just have to spend your whole time either creating content, planning creating content, or keeping an eye on the actual blogosphere, Twittersphere, talkersphere, whatever it is, to know what it is that you should be doing. I think it's incredibly hard, and I would balk actually attempting that myself, let alone, someone of younger years.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. In fact, I have some friends that are YouTubers, and I had a conversation with one of them this past week, where he has put out some things on his channel that were probably best things he's ever done. Just really creative, really informative, just really high quality stuff. But it didn't bring in nearly as much money as the stuff that he was cranking out before. And so he's kind of having to make a decision as to, do I continue to do the really, really good quality stuff that's not putting as much money in my pocket, or do I? And I think what he's going to have to do is go back to, cranking things out. So kind of the mass producing type of thing, because that's what brings in the numbers.
I think sometimes when you create content, if you pursue what is popular in a fashion where you just say, I am going to pursue what is popular, and you're doing it in a very level-headed business point of view, I think in some respects you've got a bit of an advantage of the person that says, my principles, my personal choice, my likes and dislikes mean that I want to do this, because sometimes what you want to do is not necessarily a good fit for what the public wants. So you can either strive to carve a niche with a small group, or you can just say, I will pursue what is popular irrespective of my likes and dislikes. But that's a tough thing to do. I don't think I could do it. I've always done things my way because that's the way I would want it to go.
Yeah, I agree. Me too. And I think that's maybe what people mean when they say write for yourself, podcast for yourself. Because if you try and chase that magic dollar or magic euro or whatever it is, trying to be multicultural here, then you can end up not liking what you're doing, and also the possibility still exists that you're not even going to be successful doing that.
Yes, indeed. I think sometimes just when you're sitting there and you've finished your blog post and you're just trying to come up with a title for it, and you think to yourself sometimes, I could probably get quite a lot of traffic just by phrasing it in a slightly contentious way. But then you think to yourself, but do I want to cultivate that market? Is that really representative of what the article thinks? And in my case, it's like, dial it back, make it functional. And it's like, no, make it tabloidy. You'll get 5 times as much traffic. And it's little things like that. And I think that gets exacerbated, that sort of dilemma. You face that a lot more in the YouTube and the Twitch market.
Here's a little interesting side note that's relevant to that. If I'm to look at my podcast statistics, I can tell you a couple shows that are going to right away come to the top of the download numbers. One of them is the one that I did with DJ called "When a gaming community dies," and I think it's just the title of that one that draws people in. Another one I think was "Quitting Your MMO," the one that I just recently did, and the little short solo job that I did last week that actually had multiple Markiplier's name in it actually has done pretty well too.
There you go.
So I think there is a lot to that. Just thought, that came to mind when you talked about titling your blog posts. Those were all somewhat unintentional. I just kind of titled them the way they did, but it's fun to see how those actually influence what people gravitate towards. So you wanted to talk a little bit about the shifting community. Do you want to go ahead and introduce that topic, Roger?
This is what occurred to me recently. I was writing about the Star Trek series that's been announced.
Yep.
The fact that CBS are saying, we're going to be finally putting out another Star Trek show, but we're not putting it out until 2017. And I basically wrote a curmudgeonly post in which I said, great, I'm pleased Star Trek's coming back, but we've now got 18 months / 2 years of idle speculation and the usual suspects in the fan base grumbling and nitpicking and pulling apart every single part of the production. And I actually hope it was this blog post. It might have been another one, but I think I ended it about the fact that I haven't outgrown fandom, but I think I might start outgrowing the community. And that's just got me thinking, because I think there's a little bit more to it in this. And I think it ties into what we were talking about earlier about your personal gaming journey or your gaming evolution. Mm-hmm. I think that gaming has grown naturally. It's become more commercially viable over the last 2 decades. as a result of which lots of things that used to be the preserve of a little small niche group has suddenly become open to a lot more people. That has good aspects. It also has negative aspects. I still will speak with a certain degree of pride about the people that I have the pleasure of being associated with. The other contributors in the TGen network, quite a lot of the people within the Newbie Blogger Initiative, people that have been putting out blogs, podcasts, content for a long time. I think there's some very good people out there, sensible people, people with measured opinions. I like being associated with them. I'm proud to be associated with them. But I also feel that as gaming's become more commercial, the community's become more commercial. It's become more of a commodity. I see people who are just coming into gaming and they're at the stage that I was at maybe 10, 20 years ago. So they're really fired up about things. And I'm now at a stage where I'm not that fast that you've messed the skills tree up in this particular game and taken away some of my skills. You know, I want to retire and I've got grandchildren. I'm just talking about the shifting priorities. And I also worry about the thing now about every platform that you get, social media, blogs, videos, audio, all these tools that have been democratized. I consider that to be a good thing, but it also seems to always come along with a race to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And that concerns me. For every time I see someone in the gaming community write something of note, make a stand against something like prejudice or make an interesting point about what could be done to improve games, etc., etc. For every one good thing, it might be a question of perspective. Maybe I'm missing things, but I also just see a lot of white noise and a lot of stuff that I don't like. You watch a live stream and you see a big game developer walking through their products, and a member of staff comes out on stage and starts talking about it, and you look at the comments in the Twitch stream and they're not talking about the game. They're talking about, oh, look at them. Some negative comment about the way a man or a woman looks. 9 times out of 10 it's a woman. There's been quite a lot of people working in the games industry who have gone through gender transitions, and suddenly you'll see in chat rooms a wave of comments to do with that, and you just think, I don't want to be exposed to such what I consider to be not particularly progressive attitudes. And for someone who's just coming along to a Twitch channel for the first time, that's hardly edifying. That's hardly going to send the message that gamers are good guys. And then I think Gamersgate did a heck of a lot of damage. Heck of a lot of damage as far as gamers' perception, or the perception of gamers in the wider world. And I worry about that.
See, this is kind of interesting because I don't notice that as much, and maybe it's because I don't. Well, for one thing, if I get into a Twitch stream of a major developer, I usually close the chat out. But I'm going to say something that's probably somebody's going to take the wrong way. But I think as a result of some of those attitudes and the race to the bottom, as you put it, there has been kind of a counterbalance of what I notice is a lot of people just very laser focused on every single social justice issue out there. And I'm not against social justice at all, but I can understand the people who say, you know what, this is my hobby. I don't want to think about politics when I'm sitting down to game. And I know politics is involved, and I know that there are real life things going on within games, within gaming companies. But I'm just saying I can see where somebody could say, you know, could you just leave me alone with the social justice and let me play my game for a while? Because every once in a while I will have that feeling when watching Twitter. I have a lot of people in my Twitter feed that are fairly progressive. And sometimes I just want to, you know, think about the games and not worry about, you know, there is social injustice in the world. We've come to understand that fact. We don't have to think that it's right. but I don't want to be reminded of it all the time either.
No, I think that's fair. I like to think that the game developers are embracing change. There are things that can be done, and they can be done just as a matter of course. They don't have to be shouted from the rooftops. They don't have to be. You don't have to belabor your consumer base, your player base, with certain issues in a very clumsy fashion. I think there's ways of handling these issues so people can log into games, and if they want to, just find their little niche corner and say, there's me, I'm doing my thing, let me do my thing. I support you in principle, but just let me get on with my stuff. And I think there is a balance to be found there. I think it's impossible to make any game apolitical. It just doesn't work that way, because the very point of saying this is going to be an apolitical product or zone, area, media item is a political act in itself. But I think that's getting a bit deep, and I don't know if we want to go down that road. But yeah, there is a balance. There is a balance. The other thing is, I like games. I think games are important as art. I think games reflect what's happening in the world, so therefore that makes them a point of interest beyond what they just do, which is to entertain and engage people. I think games reflect us as a society. But there's a line I draw under games and say, yes, they are deep, but they don't go any deeper than that. And I worry when I think some people start reading far more into games than what I think is actually truly there. I think games were initially, for a brief period, an inclusive meritocracy, and I think that time has been and gone, because they're now just commercial products, and very few commercial products are true meritocracies. And yet you will get people so inflamed and impassioned about games. I mean, look at the fact that you get people sending death threats to developers because the skills tree has been messed with. That's just wrong, messed up. Yet, to me, and people are feel free to object to this point, I consider that to be misplaced passion. It's good that people are passionate. I think it's important that people have passion in their lives, but you'll get hundreds of thousands of people bitching and carping about changes made to a game, and then the local authority wants to shut down the accident and emergency ward in your hospital, and you're trying to get a protest together and campaign against it, and you can't get enough people involved. And to me, I just find it bizarre that people will get up in arms about things that in the great scheme of things aren't necessarily that important, and yet they won't lift a finger against other things that really are.
Yeah, that's a good point. And really, you know, when you say that, that brings to mind once again the thought process that I'm going through personally as I try and figure out, do I invest my time in my real life work career and my family more, or do I continue to do what I'm doing with gaming and content production? It's really the same type of issue, I think. You know, it's where do I spend my time and where am I going to get the best return? And that's a tough. I don't always like the answer to that question.
We've produced podcasts. These require technical skills. I'm sure during the course of the last couple of years, you've acquired new skills. Some of those skills are transferable, so that makes it a good thing if you look at things purely in those terms. You can also cogently argue that being part of a community, interacting with people, nurturing people, reaching a point where some people say, oh, you've been around for a while, so therefore we rate you as a senior member of this community. You suddenly realise that there's responsibilities that go with that, and these are all things of merit. But at the end of the day, you can also turn around and argue that what we're writing about, what we're producing is very much ephemeral. Mm-hmm. And ultimately doesn't have as much impact as, say, if you took the same time that you spent on blogging and podcasting and put it into studying for a qualification that then got you promoted, that then brought more money into your household, that improved your life, your family's life, and because of the promotion, you then started meeting new people, moved to a different area. Your children then suddenly made new friends, developed new hobbies. Do you know what I mean? It's trying to balance up, saying, what is the worth of this in the great scheme of things? And I'm not saying this in any way to try and trivialize gaming and fandom, but there are times when you do, I've done it myself, you question the time and energy that you're putting into A, and you just think, but would I not be better off doing it in B or C?
Right. Some of the nice things about Extra Life is that it really kind of touches on both.
Sure.
But I would also say that it's probably, well, I guess I shouldn't say this. This is a very general term. It's easier for some people to make a PayPal donation than it is to get up out of their house and go do some kind of actual charity work. You know, I know that's probably the case for me because I have more money than time in my life right now. Some people might be the opposite. So it's probably more of a sacrifice for me to set a day aside and go outside of my house and do something physically, you know, perhaps volunteer at a soup kitchen or clean up somebody's yard or whatever it may be, than it would be to throw a donation at somebody. And maybe some people are the opposite. You know, maybe it's more of a sacrifice for them to actually make a financial donation. I'm not saying either one is better than the other, but sometimes in the interest of personal development, you need to challenge yourself too.
Again, it comes down to, if you suddenly at some point decide that you're going to do the blogging, the podcasting, and you want to make that your job and you want to make a living from it, then you approach that in a subtly different way than something that you just do as a pastime, and then the pastime becomes moderately successful and you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you're going, well, this is going well, but it's beginning to soak up your resources and your time. I was thinking the other day about music that I used to listen to, bands, albums that were particularly significant to me. And you look back at various stages in your life and think, yeah, I was all over that. That was definitely the thing that got me excited and I was into at the time. And it's interesting to see that there are some things that stick with you all the way through your life.
Yeah.
And then there are other things that are very much distinct phases of the time. And I'd like to speak to a lot of bloggers and podcasters and say, do you see yourself doing this or whatever the technical modern equivalent of it is in 10, 20, 15? Look, that wasn't numerically correct. 10, 20, 30 years' time. I'm just curious about that because I'm 47.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting age. You know, I'm still not a total write-off and an old git. But give it another couple of years. I'm going to be in my 50s, and that's half a century. And people's perceptions of people of 50 is quite interesting. And it's just like, I wonder if I'm going to still be doing this. I think I'm still going to write, regardless where I am, even if it just ends up being a diary for myself. I have a compulsion to write. But I, because of what we've been talking about, and the fact that we're both at a stage when we're possibly considering scaling content creation back, I have thought of late, am I still going to be doing this or something similar forever?
Yeah. Interesting question. Side note, my next Twitter poll, is Roger Edwards a git?
Yes. A particularly old and crusty one.
As we talk about, I did have one more question along those lines. As you've progressed through different stages of life, you said you've gamed for a long time. Has your stage of life affected the kinds of games that you play?
I think so. I went through a stage where I was competitive, and therefore things like first-person shooters and the satisfaction of a kill and getting at least 2/3 of the way off a leaderboard was important. When I got into MMOs, 2007, 2008, that was at the heyday of social MMO games, and I wanted that social aspect. And now, only 8 years on, it's like, no, I don't want that. At this moment in time, what satisfies me the most from games is RPGs. I'm paying through Witcher 3 at the
Okay.
moment, and I love it. The thing I love most is it's the interactive narrative. It's a well-told story, but you have an option to influence it and take it in different directions. Not hugely so, because it's not as if you have 30 different endings and stuff. But I love it. It's tonally right for me at the moment. It has some adult themes. It reflects the fact that the world is not black and white, and that there is complexity and ramifications in everything that happens. Yeah, I think very much so. I can remember in the late 80s and very early 90s, my love affair with console games, particularly Mario-based games. I mean, they really hit the right spot at the time, the fact that you could have a few mates around and play Mario Kart for hours and hours and hours. I think timing and place and where you're at in your life has as equal amount of impact on your choice of games as it does upon what books you read, what shows you watch, what music you listen to.
Yeah, certainly. I would agree with that. And it's funny, I've come to the place now where I actually kind of prefer the single player experience also. And I am playing Marvel Heroes, which is technically a multiplayer online game. But let's be honest, there's not a whole heck of a lot of social interaction going on in that game. I can remember when you made your first reference to wanting to get away from the dwarf jumping up and down in your peripheral vision. And,
yes.
And at the time when you said that, I was thinking to myself, why would you want to play anything by yourself? You know, I just don't understand where Roger's going with this feeling. And now I'm there. I'm at that point now where I'm just kind of like, you know what? I don't want other people watching me play. I don't want people watching a stream of me playing. I just want to sit down and do my thing by myself. So yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you're at, what your gaming preferences are. I had one last question that seems completely irrelevant to the rest of our conversation, but it does have to do with gameplay preference. And it's strictly because I recently picked up Shadow of Mordor from Steam when they had their Halloween sale, and I think I picked it up for $17 or $18, which is exactly what I said I was going to do when everybody was playing it last year. And that game is incredible. I love this game. And the funny thing about it is, it's not any different than any of the other Assassin's Creed games that I've played. It really is exactly like Assassin's Creed in a Middle-earth setting. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, I knew I liked the Assassin's Creed games, and I'd heard that this was just like that, but it wasn't until I got into it that I really realized how much of a clone it is. It's really just a coat of paint over Assassin's Creed, probably Brotherhood or something like that. And I thought to myself, I keep going back to these same games because there's a familiarity aspect to it. They kind of evolve the game, but they certainly aren't innovative within the game. Now, people who play Shadow of Mordor will tell you that there's this, I forget exactly what the term for it is. Do you remember what it's called? The system where the orcs are different ranks?
The Nemesis
system, right. They'll tell you that this is an innovation. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it is definitely different than what Assassin's Creed does with their games, but it's not completely game changing to me. The look and feel of the game itself is still very, very familiar. The controls and everything else, very familiar. And so I was thinking to myself, I always hear people on podcasts, gamers on podcasts, and writing in blogs complaining about how we're not seeing anything new. You know, it's just another coat of paint on the same old game. But is that really what we want? Do we really want something completely new that's going to blow us away and be completely different than anything we've ever seen? Or are we the type of people that really like to have that familiarity to return to? If you look at the numbers, the games that sell the best are the ones that have just been another iteration of the same game. You know, that's why they crank out Assassin's Creed games every year and Call of Duty games every year and Madden football games and FIFA every year, because people just like that game and they're going to buy it again. You know, so I tend to wonder, do we really want something brand new that we've never seen before? Or is that really just the real hardcore enthusiasts that are just tired because they've done it so much, What's the real gamer really want?
Well, I reckon this question is a podcast in itself. We could get really pseudo-intellectual and rather pompous here, and the dualistic mind and cognitive dissonance. What I find with gamers is they have two settings, and it's not just this doesn't just apply to gaming. It applies to pretty much every other aspect of our lives. There's the notional idea that you buy into. We want innovation. Yes, why would I possibly want more of the same? We want to be challenged. We want something different. Yes. And then there's the reality. The reality is people take a great deal of comfort out of familiarity, out of perpetuating known quantities. That's the whole basis of the fast food industry, that you can go into McDonald's pretty much anywhere in the world. There are minor differences, but by and large, you are getting the same product up to a certain standard, and it will satisfy you. And this is how it works with gamers. If you ask gamers what they want, they tell you what they think they should tell you. And then what they really want is pretty straightforward. It's usually more of the same with just a little bit of change thrown in. And if you give gamers something truly innovative, or something that they said that they want, 9 times out of 10 it falls flat on its face. What was that game recently? It was an old school MMO. It had permadeath. Possibly even if you failed more than a couple of times, you blew the whole game and had to set up a new account. I forget the name. Me and Brian talked about it a couple of times.
Too.
It was a real, on paper, hardcore game MMO experience. And the bottom line is everyone said, yes, this is what we want. Back to basics. Game get launched. No one played it. It shut shop in 6 months. And you just think, well, okay, cheers, guys. You obviously spoke your mind. Not. Mm-hmm. And this is what human beings do. This is just an example. It's not a political hobby horse of mine. Carbon footprints and the environment. We want to reduce flights. Flights put out a heck of a lot of CO2, bad for the environment, blah-de-blah-de-blah, reduce the carbon footprint. Yes, we should. I'm a parent. I want the planet to be in good condition for my children. So that means we're going to have to cut down on flights. Okay, we're going to put the price up. Okay, it's going to affect you. What, I won't be able to go for a quick weekend break to Sorrento? No. Oh, okay, I now completely recant everything I said. And I think people castigate the developers, but they're just doing what sound business market research and their gut instinct tells them. Give them a new iteration, make some tweaks to it, and I think that was there in Shadow of Mordor. It had a lot of familiar aspects to it, but the Nemesis system was a little new enough change to keep people happy and engaged. I hadn't usually played a good many games that had that sort of chain attack, where the more you hit them, you built up a hit meter, and then once it hit certain parts on hit meter, it released additional things that you could do. Wasn't so familiar with that. So for me, that was actually quite innovative. Now that I've seen that in Shadow of Mordor, I suddenly see that in a lot more games.
Right.
I think the reality is people do want a degree of innovation in moderation. It's like politics. In the UK, over the last decade, there has been a lot of socially progressive politics. And things have been done that I was quite surprised they actually managed to get through Parliament. They actually managed to vote these things through and make them law, because I would have thought there were still sufficient people out there with slightly older perspectives on the world that weren't comfortable with these changes, but they've got through. But I'm beginning to think now in the UK that we've got as much as we can get through Parliament, and we've now got to maybe just sit back and hold fire for a couple of years, and then start maybe introducing some new stuff. Because if you just keep going forward, innovation, there reaches a point when people start getting a little bit concerned about it, that maybe it's running away, and then there's pushback against it. And I think that's exactly the same with gaming. You have to make the changes in a measured way, or else people will go, "Whoa, no, this is too much too soon. I'm going back to Mario Kart," or I'm going back to whatever. It's a terrible fine line for the game companies to have to walk, but that's what it's like when you're dealing with people. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
I've found that in most cases, I will play a game that is somewhat familiar or reminds me of another game. But there has been the rare occasion where, like when I stopped playing Guild Wars 2 and started playing Marvel Heroes about 6 or 7 months ago, where I was just tired of MMOs and I just wanted to try something completely different. And I returned to Marvel Heroes mostly because I think Age of Ultron had just come out and, it was fresh in my mind. And I thought, well, let's see what they've done because I haven't played that game for a couple of years. First time I played it, I hated it. I hated the isometric nature. I hated that it felt like a shallow game compared to Lotro when I was playing Lotro at the time. But for whatever reason, I was at the right point of my life where that's the type of gameplay I was looking for. And it was different than anything that I was familiar with, because I hadn't played Diablo. I hadn't played any of these isometric quasi ARPG MMO type games before. And so Marvel Heroes was my first try at that. And it just happened to be the right place, and the right time. And it was a complete change. But other than that, those few times when that's happened, I would just as soon boot up something that I already know how to play and don't have to start from square one.
I had a similar experience recently with Hand of Fate, which is a card game. Well, it's a video game, but based around building up a deck and using that deck. But then once you get to certain points within the game, the actual battles that you play with the cards, you actually then do physically. You actually then get an avatar with a shield.
Oh, that's cool.
That was right outside of my comfort zone, but the game was presented in such an intriguing way, and I must admit I saw some very good YouTube videos that promoted the game in a very positive way that I actually thought, okay, it's that time where I try something different and play the game that normally I wouldn't touch, and as a result I had a very rewarding experience. And also I dipped my toe into Marvel Heroes for a while and found it, for a short period of time, it satisfied my need for easy jump into action and mindless pew-pew. Mm-hmm. And then after a while it became frustrating because I wanted a little bit more than that, and all it could offer was that. That is, it was a classic example of what you see is what you get.
Yes, it is.
But that's not to say it was a bad game. It's just a question of it wasn't right for me, and I tried it, found that it was okay, but then there were other things that I would like more. And I think this links back to innovation. It's not just a question of innovation within the games. I think there's a responsibility within us as gamers to sometimes, for us to be innovative by stepping outside of our comfort zone, maybe?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's very easy when you've spend a whole day at work or messing with whatever it is you're having to mess with to just sit down and take the easy road instead of trying something completely new and challenging your understanding of what gaming is. Yeah. I think. Roger, I know it's late where you're at, and I want to let you go, but I wanted to first thank you for jumping on here short notice, because I just, on a whim decided that maybe we should do a podcast together.
It's the hours, no problem at all. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation and the opportunity to hold forth on a subject. I must admit that it's very close to my heart at the moment, because my life is going through change, a positive change, and that's having naturally a knock-on effect on the blogging, the podcasting, and the general perilous things that I allegedly do. And in a way, it's really helped by talking about these things. It's actually helped me get some of my head around some of the ongoing things that I'm dealing with at the moment. So thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, no problem. Sometimes it's good to kind of kind of let everybody know where you're at. I think I've done blog posts and podcasts before that are somewhat narcissistic, I think, but at the same time, it's kind of nice to finally, some of these things you've been internalizing for so long to kind of get them out there and just kind of let people know what's going on with you. So thanks again. Did you want to go ahead and give your contact information before we wrap up?
Absolutely. Thank you. I can be found on Twitter. That is the main social media platform that I use these days. I've said goodbye to Facebook and Google Plus, and I can be found at Roger Edwards at Moderate Peril, and the website is still containsmoderateperil.com or containsmoderateperil.net. Either one will get you to where you need to get. The old Contains Moderate Peril podcast, unfortunately, is no longer around. We're now just focusing all our efforts on Burton and Scrooge, which can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud.
Thanks. And this has been Braxwolf. You can contact me on Twitter at BRAXWOLF, Braxwolf. And you can visit my blog at braxwolf.com. You can also find me on all those other media sites that Roger no longer frequents. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you stopping by today.